Okay, so this is Unit 6. In your textbook, if you're using your textbook, it is actually Chapter 7. So this is the first video. It's the introduction, so make sure you're titling it, and you might want to title it Memory. Okay, so I listed the different videos here that we're going to go through. Your book breaks it apart in two separate topics. One is memory, and then next week or the next section we'll talk about is cognition. Okay, so memory has 6 different videos that you're going to go through, sequences, and then cognition has 3, which we will talk about. So, first thing, let's just kind of get a definition is what is memory? Memory is learning that has persisted over time. Memory is the process of information that has been encoded. First, it's encoded, stored, and then it can be retrieved. So, in other words, people say memory is like a computer for information processing. You first encode it, then you store it, and then the retrieval process takes place. First thing then is encoding, okay? And encoding is pretty much the process by which a stimulus is translated into a mental code. So it's where you're recording information into your brain. So if you compare it to a computer, it's typing the information into the computer, into your brain. There's 2 different types of encoding we will talk about. There's effortful coding and automatic encoding. And then when we get into encoding, we'll talk about different levels of encoding, tools for encoding and memory techniques, different ways that you can encode information into your brain. The second stage that takes place is storage. Storage is the changing in the neural system that allows retention. So it's you retaining information. There's different ways you store information. You go through the process of sensory information memories, short-term memories, and then you have your long-term memories. With storage, we're going to talk about different areas of the brain that stores information. Your hippocampus, which you should remember, and your temporal lobe. And oftentimes there's storage decay, which can cause us to not be able to remember certain things. So again, this is part of the computer that's saving the document. It's storing it into your brain. And the last thing that happens is the retrieval process, the process of getting information out of your memory storage or getting information out of your brain. So you have it in the storage unit, but now you have to retrieve it. And there's different ways you can retrieve it by using recall, relearning, or recognition. So it's actually finding it and opening it up. So really, here's the 3 different stages of memory. Okay, and it's comparing it to a computer. So there's a lot of graphics on this presentation, which I advise you to copy down in your notebook or print out for yourself. You have the first stage, which is encoding. Second thing that happens then is you store it, you save it, and then the last thing you have is you retrieve it. So now that we have kind of the process of how memory works, let's talk about the different 3-box model. This is the information processing model by Richard Atkinson and Richard Schiffen. What they both believed is we have 3 areas in which we process information. We first experience a sensory memory, then it goes to short term, and then it goes to long term. So as we encode it, it goes into sensory to short term to long term. It stays in storage for a period of time in your long term until you need to go back and grab it for your short term memory. That's the retrieval process. So let's break down the different sensory, short term, long term stages. So the first one you have is your sensory memory. Sensory memory is the immediate initial recording of sensory information in the memory system. You have 2 different types. You have echoic and iconic. Echoic is sensory memory that's a sound. It usually lasts for 1 to 2 seconds. Okay, it's me stating this lecture. You might remember it for 1 or 2 seconds, and then the sensory memory is gone. Iconic is a visual. You remember the vision that you saw, usually for a fraction of a second, so a little bit shorter. So which one lasts longer is the echoic. Sensory memory is stored for just an instant and most gets unprocessed. A good thing that you might want to draw are the pictures below of the eye and the ear to help you remember. Short-term memory then, if it makes its way from sensory to short-term memory holds for a few items briefly, such as 7 digits of a phone number while dialing before the information is either stored or forgotten. So it's a short time. These are the 4 different components of short-term memory. Time. Usually it only holds them up for up to a minute. Capacity. Usually you remember only up to 7 items or 7 digits, plus or minus what they say 2. So 9 or 5. Unusual. Usually you remember things from your sensory memory that is out of the ordinary. And then rehearsal. Usually you remember terms that are rehearsed. So the information will be stored into long-term memory if it's rehearsed. Okay, otherwise it'll be forgotten. So you must repeat things over and over again and put them into your long-term memory. So otherwise they're going to stay in short. Then you have the long-term memory. Long-term memory occurs after short-term, where the information is able to be recalled and recognized because of rehearsals. There's unlimited amount of storage for your long-term memory, as long as it's rehearsed over and over again. Okay, you have, as it says on there, different types, and we will go through this at a different presentation. But you have declarative, procedural memories are the 2 different types, which we'll break down. So here's another good visual. Okay, you have the storage, encoding, storage, and retrieval taking place. Okay, you have the stimuli coming in, and your senses register it, then calls your attention, okay, which is your sensory memory here. Goes to short-term memory. Remember, if it's unusual, if it's 7 items for a minute, and then if it's rehearsed, it goes to long-term memory. And eventually then you're going to retrieve it back to your short-term memory. Here's another really good graph from your textbook. You have the external events that are occurring, sensory memory registers incoming information, okay? And then it goes to it becomes a sensory memory for you. So whether you're hearing someone shout or you're seeing something in the crowd, and then attention is important, okay? Or if it's rehearsed or if it's unusual, it will go to your short-term memory, otherwise known as what's called a working memory. Okay, and then if it's then rehearsed, it'll go to long-term memory. And then again, if you want to remember something like somebody's name, it'll come back into your short-term memory. And we'll talk about retrieval cues. Okay, another term for the short-term memory is what's known as working memory. Working memory is a newer understanding of short-term memory that focuses on our conscious, active processing of incoming information, visual information, auditory information. And it's also talking about information from your long term. So short term and working memory are oftentimes used interchangeably. And that's it. So as you might want to do, since we're talking about memory, you might want to go back and rehearse the presentation that we went through today and know the different components of memory: encoding, storage, retrieval, and the 3-box model.